Allies of Convenience by J.N. Cheney and Terry Mixon. Performed by Jeffrey Kafer. Lieutenant Jack Romanoff woke from a nightmare when the general quarters alarm blared in his tiny cabin, and he narrowly avoided hitting his head on the bulkhead his bed cubby was set in. He blinked the sleep out of his eyes as he hurriedly dressed in his duty uniform and raced into the crowded corridor with the rest of the off-shift crew. His regular duty station was on the bridge at the helm console, but Darkwind's captain had banished him to auxiliary control after he'd come close to clipping a cruise liner that had unexpectedly crossed in front of them a month back, so that's where he headed. Space was tight aboard a Confederation cruiser, so auxiliary control was even smaller than the cramped bridge. It only had 3 stations, including the executive officer's seat. Commander Mitch Marziali, Darkwind's executive officer, was already at his post, looking as if he'd been on duty for hours, rather than having just been woken up. Jack was duly impressed. "Run your fingers through your hair, Jack," the dark-skinned man said with a smile. "Your hair is sticking straight up, and that's going to scare the ratings." Flushing, Jack tried to get his hair to behave, vowing once again to just buzz it all off. He, of course, failed to get it under control, but the XO handed him a small comb plucked from his uniform pocket, which Jack quickly used to somewhat tame his unruly hair. "What's going on, sir?" Jack asked, as he handed the comb back just before the third member of the Auxiliary Control Primary Watch arrived on station. While Lieutenant Melissa Kyle didn't look like she'd just woken up, the Assistant Tactical Officer's eyes were still red with sleep. At least her hair was under control. "Looks like we have pirates in the Kingslayer system," Marziali said. "We jumped through the quantum gate almost on top of a pirate boarding a merchant freighter. There was no response to our hails and he took off, but we're close enough to intercept. Once we disable his drives, we'll send the Marines to sort things out. You don't need to take your station, though. The captain has something else in mind for you." The officer's words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He wasn't even going to be allowed to run the auxiliary helm. Captain Kadam had been angrier than he thought. Before Jack could figure out what to say, Ensign Kim Krafsky stepped into auxiliary control. She was the second assistant helm officer. Basically, the inexperienced trainee he and the assistant helm officer were coaching to do the job. Though none of the department heads were all that senior on what amounted to a training cruise, she was exceptionally green. Marziali sighed and gestured for Jack to come closer after the young woman had taken the helm console. "Stop looking like someone kicked your puppy, Jack. Neither the captain nor I am punishing you. This is actually a chance to redeem yourself before you sit for the promotion board. You'd rather have them looking at a successful operation than a moment's inattention, wouldn't you?" Jack swallowed and nodded. He'd do just about anything to take the promotion board's mind off that damned liner. "Yes, sir. What do you need me to do?" "You're going to take a fire team of Marines over to the merchant vessel and make sure everything is copacetic. Work with the crew to get their ship back under control if they still have issues, and hold location until we take care of the pirates and come back for you. It's a straightforward mission. If you can carry this off, the captain will put you back on the bridge where you belong. You're a good officer, and you're going to make a fine leader one day, but you need some seasoning. This is a chance to get that." "I'll make it happen, sir," Jack said, his resolve firming. "Other than the Marines, who will I be taking with me? This is one of those situations where having a lot of people isn't going to be helpful. You're not going to be flying the merchant, just making sure that the crew is back in control and safe. Since you're taking 4 Marines, I figure you can grab 3 ratings, and that should be enough to handle any little brush fires." The man leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "Don't overthink this, Jack. Keep the civilians safe and ensure no pirates got left behind when their ship ran. Stay calm and listen to the Marines for guidance if something comes up." "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't. Get moving and don't forget to draw sidearms for yourself and the ratings. I don't expect you'll need them, but it never hurts to be a bit overprepared." Jack headed toward the landing bay at a trot. A cruiser was a big ship, but engines and weapons took up most of its volume. The small craft bay contained a tightly packed pair of marine pinnaces and a pair of cutters. Standing in front of a cutter were 4 armed Marines in armored vacuum suits with their helmets off. A woman with a corporal's tab saluted. "Colonel Rossini and Fire Team 3 are ready for action, sir." "Glad to have you, Corporal. Get aboard the cutter and we'll be on our way as soon as I grab some ratings." She gave him a firm nod and gestured for her people to board. He looked around the small craft bay and spotted a trio of enlisted ratings watching him, and he gestured for them to come over. "Grab pressure suits and come with me." They obviously weren't thrilled to be picked for this mission, but that's what they got for standing around with their hands in their pockets when he needed warm bodies. He followed them to where the vacuum suits were racked, grabbed a suit, and quickly put it on. The odds of them being in vacuum when they got to the merchant ship were low, but it was far better to have suits and not need them to be caught short if they lost pressure. Once he and the ratings were suited up, they drew sidearms from the weapons locker. As one of the department heads, though low in rank for the position, his thumbprint was in the system. The sidearms were in holsters and already on belts, so they could strap them on outside their suits. That done, they boarded the cutter. Jack left the ratings to strap in across from the Marines while he headed to the piloting compartment. It only took a minute to bring the small craft fully online as he strapped himself in. "Control, this is Cutter 1. He said over the flight control channel through his suitcom, which was linked to the cutter's systems. "Requesting permission to depart." "Cutter 1, you are cleared to depart," the flight controller said. "The merchant vessel's IFF has her as Edgar's Ghost, and she's approximately 40 minutes away at standard thrust, about halfway to Kingslayer orbit. Darkwind will change course as soon as you're clear and will go after the pirate. He's not quite as fast as we are, so we'll catch him before he gets to the other quantum gate in the system, but I suspect you'll get to the merchant before we catch our guy." "Copy that," Jack said. "Good hunting." "And you as well, Lieutenant. Keep safe." The small craft bay's external hatch slid aside, while strong fields of force kept the atmosphere in. Jack picked the cutter off the deck and took them out through the opening. Once the cutter was in space, he quickly located the merchant vessel on his sensors and set course for them, kicking the acceleration up to the highest level used in normal operations. If there were pirates still aboard and they had small craft, he'd be taking a risk, so he'd slow down when he got a little closer. Of course, if there were pirates aboard the freighter, the entire situation would be a lot more complicated than they'd planned on. The freighter was under thrust to Kingslayer, though still some distance from orbit. They'd have to deal with that before too much longer, as he had no desire to threaten the orbital infrastructure with an uncontrolled ship. "Edgar's Ghost, this is a cutter from the Confederation Navy cruiser Darkwind inbound to your location," he said over the general space traffic frequency. "What is your status? Are there any pirates left aboard?" There was no response, but he wasn't sure if that was because they'd chosen not to reply or if the pirates had disabled their communications system. The latter sounded like something a pirate would do, though. If no one could hear a ship calling for help, then they wouldn't come running. He spent the next half hour occasionally attempting to communicate with the merchant ship and watching Darkwind slowly creep up on the fleeing pirate. It wouldn't be long before the cruiser would be in range to disable them, though he'd likely be aboard the merchant by then. Once he was close enough to Edgar's Ghost, he slowed and started looking for a place to dock. Merchant ships weren't as well outfitted as Navy cruisers, so they didn't have small craft bays. Instead, small craft attached themselves to the hull and used flexible ports for the crew to get in and out. Luckily, all naval vessels were also equipped to utilize those, so his people could board without difficulty. The challenging part was figuring out where the best spot to hit them would be. He called Rossini up to join him. When she stepped through the hatch connecting the control area with the rest of the cutter, he gestured toward the merchant vessel growing large in front of them. "I still haven't gotten a response from them, Corporal. Is there any particular location you'd like to dock?" The woman stared at the merchant ship, her eyes narrowing. "The closer you can get to engineering, the better I'd feel, sir. You Navy types always think the control area is where the magic happens, but if we stop the ship from accelerating, we have control." "I'm not an engineering officer, but I can probably help you with that," Jack said. "It looks like there's an unoccupied docking port just off engineering, so we're in luck." The merchant ship was big, though most of its bulk was taken up by containers rather than habitable areas. There were probably some internal holds as well, but the vast majority of the cargo carried would be containerized so it could be transshipped without unpacking the vessel. There were half a dozen docking ports scattered across the ship, and 4 of them were occupied. It looked like 2 amidships held large cargo shuttles, and 1 forward and another aft held battered cutters. That left the aft port they were heading for and another open one at the front of the ship. "Get your people ready and I'll let you know 30 seconds before we dock," Jack said. "I'll try contacting them one last time before then." As soon as Rossini vanished back into the passenger area, Jack again tried to raise the merchant, but was unsuccessful. They just have to do this the hard way. He set course for the aft docking port, warning his passengers that they were going in. He'd chosen to approach the freighter from the rear just in case they had weapons, even though that was a serious offense. It would be just his luck to be shot down because they thought he was a pirate. Though Jack had less experience docking with the flexible tubes than he did using a small craft bay, all Navy pilots had to master this particular task. He smoothly brought the cutter into place and clamped the magnetic locks down, tying the vessels together before triggering the docking port mating sequence. His indicator showed green as pressure evened between the ships, and he swiped his hand across the cutter's console, locking it against intrusion. He absolutely did not want anyone running off with their ride. He made his way to the back of the cutter where the Marines were already stacked up to go into the freighter. As soon as the corporal saw him, she hit the controls and opened the cutter's hatch. That still left the merchant's hatch, but it opened when she fed the Navy overrides. Its motion wasn't smooth, but it didn't jam, so that was a win. He followed the Marines into the freighter with the ratings at his back. He left his weapon in its holster while the Marines secured the area around the docking port. The lighting was spotty at best, but they weren't met by hostile forces, so he'd take that as another win. Of course, they weren't met by friendlies either, so he still had to locate whoever was in command of Edgar's ghost and get this all sorted out before someone made a mistake they couldn't walk back. He tried the suit comms and discovered the pirates had left a jammer active aboard the ship. Even right next to one another, he couldn't punch a signal through. They'd have to use external speakers and microphones to communicate. Since Rossini had insisted engineering was the best place to set up, and he agreed, that's where the group headed. The corporal sent 2 Marines up front and pulled the remaining one into the back of the formation with her, bracketing the Navy personnel. Together, they jogged down the corridor toward the aft of the ship. When they reached the hatch leading to engineering, they found the first indications that the ship had been boarded. A dead body lay in a heap in the corridor, having been shot multiple times. Someone had also used explosives to get into engineering. Faced with this, Jack drew his pistol, though he kept it pointed toward the ceiling as they advanced. He didn't want a chance accidentally shooting one of the Marines in the back because something startled him. A glance at the rating showed them emulating his posture as they raced into the engineering compartment. The place was an abattoir. At least 8 bodies were scattered around the relatively dingy space. Most of them were in ship suits, but a couple were wearing some kind of armor. "Stay here," Rossini ordered, but she gestured for 2 of the Marines to accompany her deeper into engineering. Since she was the combat specialist, she was more than happy to follow her instructions. The remaining Marine set himself up at the hatch and ensured that no one slipped up on them from behind. Jack gestured for the ratings to move out of the way. The smart thing would have been for him to join them while the Marines cleared engineering, but Jack eased over to the main console. Even though he wasn't an engineering officer, it only took a glance to see the primary engineering systems were operational. There were a couple of yellow items, but nothing offline or dangerous. Rather than messing with the console, Jack focused on the Marines and watched as they moved deeper into engineering, then circled around equipment and verified no one was hiding behind anything. "All clear," Rossini said after a minute. "We've got a couple of bodies back here, but no live ones. Sir, have you noticed the crew is armed?" Jack hadn't, and he turned his attention back to the bodies scattered near the entrance. Those wearing armor had carbines, basically short rifles that were useful in tight spaces, but even the merchant crew had pistols. Maybe the captain had armed the crew when it became apparent the pirates were going to board. "If they were working on repelling the pirates, they didn't do a very good job of it," he said quietly. "They'd have been better off with shotguns at this range. I'll bring our velocity to 0 and then shut down the drives." It took about 60 seconds of paging through the various screens before he found the right one. Once he did, Jack disconnected the drives from bridge control and reversed thrust. It would take half an hour to bring the ship to a complete halt relative to the planet, but that would keep the ship from endangering the orbital infrastructure or even the planet itself. Now all he needed to do was contact the crew and assess the conditions aboard the freighter. It was conceivable that the pirates had killed the crew, which would turn this into an exceptionally grisly experience, so he hoped that wasn't the case. Going to the communications substation, he opened a channel to broadcast his voice throughout the ship. Attention, this is a boarding party from the Confederation Navy cruiser Dark Wind. We have seized control of your engineering spaces and cut your thrust. If anyone can hear my voice, please respond so we can ascertain the situation aboard your ship." He'd barely shut down his transmission when the sound of an automatic weapon firing somewhere up the corridor echoed off the bulkheads, followed by several pistol shots in response. "On your guard," Rossini snapped. "It sounds like we still have pirates on board. Willis and Adams, if you see anybody moving in that corridor, give them a shouted warning. If they keep coming, open fire. Clear?" "Clear." The Marines responded in unison before setting up a makeshift firing point at the hatch. The communication station chimed with an incoming call, and Jack answered it. "Lieutenant Jack Romanoff here, with whom am I speaking?" "This is Mark Connor, owner-operator of Edgar's Ghost. The pirates disabled our external communication system and sensors, so we didn't know anyone was coming." "Where are your people?" Jack asked the merchant captain. "How many crew members do you have aboard?" "We started with 4 dozen, but we're down to half that. These bastards just won't stop pushing. If there's a Confederation ship nearby, can't you make them surrender?" "That's hard to do when we can't talk to them. Roughly how many pirates do you think are aboard?" "Less than a dozen, but they're not exactly the kind of people that want to chat, if you catch my drift. If you can't get them to surrender, perhaps we could join forces and push them into a part of the ship where they can't do us any harm. We've got some internal cargo areas that would make for a decent prison until your people could pick them up. Between your people and mine, I'd wager we can probably force them where we want them. They're already kind of bottled up near the cargo area." If this had been a Navy vessel, Jack would have been able to use the internal sensors to get an idea of where everyone was. But that obviously wasn't going to help him here. He was just going to have to do this the hard way. "I'm willing to consider that in principle, Captain Connor, but I'm not going to throw my people into a situation where they're in danger against an overwhelming force if we don't need to. It may be time for you to evacuate your ship." "I don't bloody well think so. I've got a damned fortune tied up in this ship and her cargo, and I'm not going to let anyone take her from me. If you're not going to help us, I'll just have to take care of this myself." "I didn't say I wasn't going to help you," Jack said soothingly. "We just have to do this the smart way. When the pirate ship ran, why didn't they pick up the rest of their people?" "It's not like they consulted me first," the man almost snarled. "Pirates are a collection of the worst scum in the universe. What does it matter to them if they abandon some of their crew? They're not going to know anything that'll hurt the rest." The odds of the pirates surrendering were minimal, Jack knew, because the penalties for piracy were so damned high. It wasn't like the Navy would space them, but they'd all get mandatory life sentences in whatever prison they got dumped in. Still, nothing ventured, nothing gained. "Can you make it to engineering so we can work out a plan of attack face-to-face?" Jack asked. "I'm on my way there now. Connor out." Jack switched back over to the all-hands channel. "Attention all pirates aboard this ship. Your ship has run and you have nowhere to go. Lay down your weapons and wait to be detained. Prison beats being dead." He wasn't going to hold his breath on them, accepting his offer. Desperate men did desperate things. Hell, he'd be happy enough if they took one of the cutters and made a run for the planet at this point. Then they'd be the planetary authorities' problem, not his. A minute later, one of the Marines spoke up. "We've got 3 people in the corridor. They're not holding weapons, but they have pistols on their waists." "Keep them covered," Rossini ordered. "If they reach for a weapon, shoot them." Jack walked over to the entrance without exposing himself. "Connor?" "The very same," the man said from the corridor. "We're coming in." "Just you. Have your men hold position." "That's tripe. They're sitting ducks out here. Are you afraid of 3 spacers, Navy? We promise we'll keep our hands away from our pistols." Jared ground his teeth and sighed. The man was right. He had a fire team of Marines covering them. They'd be idiots to try anything. "All right," he said. "All 3 of you can come in, but don't make any sudden moves." Rossini gestured to the Marine with her to help her cover the 3 as they made their way into engineering. She sidled up to each in turn and plucked their pistols from their holsters, then set them on a nearby console. "You can have those back when you leave," she said firmly, "and don't even think of going for one of the weapons on the floor." The man in the middle, a little older than Jack, with dark red hair and pale skin, covered with a splash of freckles, grimaced. "It's not exactly like we have much choice now, is it?" He looked at the dead bodies scattered around engineering with a grimace. Then he hauled off and kicked one of the dead pirates. Twice. Jack sympathized. He'd never lost anyone under his command, but he'd have been just as angry. Connor turned his attention to Jack. "You'll be the officer, am I right?" Jack pulled off his helmet and shook the man's hand. "Lieutenant Jack Romanoff, Confederation Navy. You've got yourself into quite the pickle, Captain Connor. You mentioned a plan to get the pirates penned up. We're going to need a map of the ship and some idea of where they are to make that happen. Maybe you can sketch something out." "I can do you one better. Might I approach the engineering console?" Jack gestured for him to do so. "Move slowly. I need to make sure you're not doing anything objectionable." "Lord knows we wouldn't want to do anything objectionable, would we?" the man said with an eye roll. "I'm just bringing up the internal sensors I paid so much to have scattered throughout the habitable portion of my ship. That'll tell us where every single person is, and we can make a plan." Jack blinked in surprise. Merchant captains weren't known for spending money on things they didn't need. Hell, they skimped on the things they needed. Those types of internal sensors, and the computational power to back them up, were unusual on a civilian ship. "Why did you install something like that, Captain?" "For a situation very much like this one," the man said with a growl. "I sometimes carry cargoes worth more than the ship itself, and I want to know if I have unexpected visitors. Hijacking is just as popular as piracy, you understand." Jack supposed that made sense, but it was still the first time he'd ever heard of anything like that being done aboard a ship as rundown as this one. It was a significant investment and seemed a little out of character. Still, he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. That type of insight into what the pirates were doing might let them carry this off without putting his people into inordinate danger. Connor slowly and carefully brought up a screen on the console that showed a map of the ship filled with a sprinkle of dots representing people. It was buried in a sub-menu Jack would have never noticed, particularly since the operating system was unfamiliar to him and he'd been in a hurry. It looked as if only his people and Connor's were in the back of the ship. The middle was crowded, and the forward end had small clusters of dots moving to the closest small craft, in this case, one of the cargo shuttles. The crew might be moving wounded to safety. Connor gestured toward the dots in the middle of the ship. "My crew reports the pirates are in Cargo Bay 3. Looks like there are 9 of them. If we could bottle them up there, we might be able to lock the hatch down and trap them until your people get here in force. The problem is that they have automatic weapons and armor, so my people can't get close enough to do anything. With your people here, that changes things." "Okay," Jack said after a moment of studying the map. "I think we can make this work. Rossini, you and the Marines are with me, and the ratings will remain here to keep an eye on engineering." To the ratings, he said, "Gentlemen, one of you watch this console. If it looks like any of the pirates are headed your way, get to the very back of the compartment and take cover. Keep your eyes open. Whatever happens, we need to keep the engines slowing the ship. You don't need to do anything but keep people away from the console. Understood?" The ratings nodded their understanding and spread out around the engineering compartment. One took station near the hatch, while the other 2 stayed near the console. "We'll call if the situation looks like it's changing, sir," one of them said. "Don't get yourself into something you can't get yourself back out of." Jack grinned. "That's why I have the Marines with me. If I get in over my head, they'll pull me out." Rossini didn't look impressed at his statement. "How are we going to coordinate with your people, Captain?" Jack asked. The man tapped a communicator at his waist. "The pirates are trying to jam us, but we have short-range communicators that link into the ship itself on a frequency that isn't standard. I can make sure my people hear us without them being any the wiser. What I suggest is that we go directly forward. It's perhaps riskier, but the pirates might pin us down if we go into one of the side corridors. Your Marines can take the lead, and my people will back them up." Rossini almost glared at Jack. "Just so we understand one another, sir, the Marines will be taking the lead and you'll be bringing up the rear. My preference would be for you to remain in engineering, but I know that's not going to happen, so I'm not going to fight you on it. Still, you're doing this under my rules, clear?" "I'm not going to fight you on this, Corporal," Jack said as he put his helmet back on. "You're the professional." Once the crew had reclaimed their pistols, the mixed group advanced up the corridor and heard shouting and weapons fire ahead. It didn't sound like the fighting was all that serious, but you only needed one bullet to ruin your day. Rossini and the Marines took the lead, advancing in pairs with their weapons at the ready. If they ran into trouble, they'd engage the pirates and force them back. The 2 crew members followed the Marines with their pistols out. Jack and Connor brought up the rear. There were signs of fighting now, bodies on the deck and blood on the bulkheads. Someone had blasted one of the hatches to a side compartment open, too. Jack glanced inside as he passed and saw a smaller cargo area that someone had stripped almost bare. There were a couple of smashed crates in one of the corners, but the rest of the contents were gone. He almost stepped past the compartment, but his brain finally caught up with what he was seeing, and he stopped. The crate's contents seemed strange to his eyes, yet oddly familiar. It took a moment for him to figure it out, but when he did, he sucked in a surprised breath. Those were fragments of locust drones. He recognized the alien curves from the training all Navy officers went through, even though it had been years. The damn things were distinctive. It had been 2 centuries since the robotic locusts had invaded the Perseus cluster in an all-out attempt to take over the Confederation. Humanity had barely turned the tide, destroying the alien invaders, but humanity had paid a dear price for victory. All that was left of the vanquished enemy were occasional bits of debris in odd corners of the cluster, which were promptly collected by the Confederation for study, so fragments of the alien machines had no place here. "You just couldn't keep your eyes to yourself, could you, Navy?" Connor asked from behind as Jack felt a pistol barrel pressing against the back of the vacuum suit helmet. His suit was sturdy, but not enough to stop a bullet. "Just what are you doing, Connor?" Jack asked, staying still and keeping his hands slightly raised. "You don't look like a stupid man to me, Navy, so let's not play games. You've seen the locust scraps for what they are, but that's not the whole story. Before you get all excited, we should take a moment to chat about it. Clear the air, so to speak." "This isn't exactly the kind of thing I can turn a blind eye to," Jack said, as his mind scrambled for a way forward that didn't include him getting shot. "And before you get all excited, if anything happens to me, Corporal Rossini is going to tear this ship and you apart." "I'd wager so," Connor agreed in an easy tone. "She seems like a woman with little patience for shenanigans, so let's move on to the meat and potatoes of the matter. I'll tell you what's going on and you can decide the best course of action for yourself. I'm a smuggler, and I was paid to deliver a shipment of locust drones scrap to Kingslayer. Illegal, but hardly the stuff of desperate fights to the death. My customer failed to mention the load included drone lasers, which is what the pirates were supposed to take delivery of before I told them to bugger off." That brought Jack up short. He'd seen pictorial evidence from the invasion that showed how powerful those lasers had been. Not as strong as the ones in use by the Navy back then, but powerful enough to almost conquer the Confederation with enough numbers. "Why wouldn't you deliver them?" Jack asked slowly. "Because, curse my soul, there are lines I won't cross. Those weapons would have been used to attack ships across the sector, and I won't be a party to that kind of suffering and misery. I'll transport a lot of questionable things, but not weapons, slaves, or hideously addictive drugs, among other things. I have a conscience, as shriveled as it may be, and that's why someone lied to me about this cargo. If an oblivious pirate hadn't told me exactly what was in the crates, I'd never have sicked my crew on them." "You attacked the pirates?" Jack had to admit that surprised him. "Well, I wouldn't put it so strongly. I told them they couldn't have the weapons, and they decided to take them by force. Technically, I was just defending myself in this matter. I'm really an innocent party in all this." Connor said that last in a droll tone. "And why should I believe a single word you've said? Surely you won't tell me there's some code of honor among smugglers that you must tell the truth now that you've been caught? Pinky swear?" Connor laughed. "Far from it, my friend. No, if I were you, I wouldn't trust a single word that came out of my mouth if I didn't have the proof to back it up. But I do have that proof, and I'm willing to show it to you right now. I'll even put away my pistol so we can be civilized about this." To suit actions to words, Connor backed away and holstered his pistol. Jack was very tempted to draw his own weapon, but he wanted to see what the smuggler said next. This mission was far more interesting than he'd expected it to be, if a lot more dangerous. The man pulled his comm unit off his belt and held it out. "Like I said earlier, this unit is tied into the ship on a channel the jamming doesn't cover, and you can observe any compartment you care to. It's that icon on the right-hand side with a video emblem. Bring it up and you'll see a listing of compartments. You can look at anything you'd like, but I'll direct your attention to cargo hold number 3. My second has been keeping an eye on it for me, and it looks like our pirate friends are almost done packing the last of the lasers. That would be one of the crates we broke open to check, so if you're looking for proof, you'll find it right there." "I'm willing to look, but that doesn't change anything. I can't just let you walk away from this, Connor. If you're looking for thanks that you're not giving the pirates lethal weaponry, well, thanks. Sadly, that doesn't absolve you from transporting the things in the first place." He frowned. "And where did they come from anyway? I thought all the locust drones had been salvaged. Getting lasers now would mean someone found mostly intact wreckage, not just scrap." "It is a mystery," the smuggler agreed. "Rest assured that's a question I'll ask someone very pointedly if I have an opportunity to do so. In any case, I'm a firm believer in leaving tomorrow's troubles for another day. Right now, I've got pirates breathing down my neck and killing my crew. They want to get the last of those lasers into the cargo shuttle nearest them. If I just stand back and let them go, they'll be gone in a few minutes. Is that really what the Confederation wants? Surely there's some kind of bargain we can strike." Jack shrugged. "I'm a junior officer stuck out on a limb all by himself. Maybe if you'd sent a message to our ship, we could have sent more Marines. Hell, you could have let us know they were taking weapons on our cargo shuttle and we'd have brought an armed pinnace. There are all kinds of things you could have done that would have resulted in less bloodshed for your crew. You talk a good game, Connor, but you're not making smart choices." Rather than waiting for the man to respond, Jack tapped the icon he'd indicated, and it opened a menu showing a series of compartments. Rather than going to Cargo Bay 3, he went to Engineering first. He saw the ratings he'd left and roughly the positions he'd expected to find them. That didn't prove anything, but it did verify the system could look at things in real time. With that accomplished, Jack selected Cargo Bay 3 and saw a scene of chaos. The bay was still mostly packed with crates, but somebody had smashed several of them apart, and 4 men were busy loading what certainly looked like massive lasers onto a large cart. The design was odd and could have been of locust origin. Jack manipulated the controls and saw that he could pan the camera. That allowed him to see the hatch where another bunch of pirates were clustered. One of them leaned out into the corridor and fired. The roar of an automatic weapon sounded down the corridor. Again, that didn't prove anything, but it certainly lent a lot of credence to the belief he was watching something in real time rather than some kind of computer tomfoolery. He checked the corridor outside the cargo bay and saw his people, and the 2 smugglers that had come with Connor were advancing from aft, and there was a cluster of smugglers farther up the corridor preventing anyone from going that direction. There were side corridors, including one directly across from the cargo bay, that would allow the pirates an avenue of escape, particularly if they were only trying to get to the nearest cargo shuttle. "Let's say I'm willing to believe you," Jack said, looking up from the comm. "What kind of deal would you like?" "We'll help you stop the pirates from getting away with the weapons. I'll even promise to take no hostile action against you or your people other than something purely defensive in nature. As you said, it's already too late for us to escape the consequences of what's happening here, but if you could argue for leniency for my crew, that would make up for some of the blood spilled keeping those weapons out of the hands of bloodthirsty pirates, don't you think?" Jack thought about it. Any promises he made wouldn't carry any weight, though he was confident Captain Kadam would at least consider what he said. Even so, it wasn't going to save the smugglers from hefty prison sentences. The civil authorities were the ones that made that call, after all. "Even if I could help you, why should I?" Jack argued. "I could pull my Marines back to my cutter and undock from this freighter right now. I could get a message to the planetary authorities in my ship. They'd stop the pirates from landing." "Maybe so, maybe not. I'm not asking that we become blood brothers, Navy. I'm looking for something more like allies of convenience. We both have something we want out of this situation, and if we work together, we can both get it. What say you? Do you want to stop some bloodthirsty bastards from getting ship-mounted lasers today? All you have to do is promise a smuggler that you'll put in a good word for his crew and help him kill some pirates. Is that so much to ask?" Jack weighed the potential outcomes and decided that letting powerful weapons like these into the hands of pirates was a terrible idea, even though cooperating with the smugglers put his people at risk. "Okay, I'll do it," he said reluctantly. "I'm not going to put my people in danger of taking a knife in the back. Get your men and go around to join your other people. We'll handle this end, and you can handle the other. I think that's safer." The man bowed slightly. "So long as your Marines don't take aggressive action against my people, you'll have nothing to fear from us. Keep the communicator so you can monitor the pirates while I go retrieve my people and slip around to block the pirates from getting to the cargo shuttle." Without another word, the man headed forward, and Jack watched him catch up with the others, have a couple of words with his people, and then dodge into a side corridor with them. When Rossini looked back toward him, he waved to show he was all right. Then he considered the communicator in his hand and quickly found the application that allowed him to communicate with various sections of the ship and connect with engineering through it. "Hello?" someone on the other end asked. "This is Romanoff. I want the 3 of you to retreat to our cutter and lock the hatch behind you. Use the comm system to contact Darkwind and apprise them of our situation. Add that this ship is a smuggler and they were moving scavenged locust drone lasers. We need to keep any small craft leaving this ship as isolated as possible. Pass that same word to the planetary authorities." I'm not sure I know how to use the communication system that well, sir, but I'll give it a try. We're leaving now. Do we need to swing by your location and pick you up? Negative. We're going to help suppress the pirates before they get off the ship. You're my insurance policy. Good luck. He killed the connection and trotted forward to join the Marines as they crouched in a side passage short of Cargo Bay 3. With the crappy lighting, he wasn't even sure the pirates knew they were there. The pirates were still firing out into the corridor, and they were mostly aiming forward and not yet threatening the Marines, other than the occasional wild shot. The smugglers' return fire was more problematic, as a bullet whining by proved. "You should have stayed back there, sir," Rossini grumbled. "It's not safe up here." Jack ignored her complaint and showed her the communications unit with the video already queued up from Cargo Bay 3. It showed that the pirates had finished loading the lasers and were in the process of preparing to make a run for the cargo shuttle. "The pirates have ship-mounted weapons in there," he said. "We need to keep them from getting them off the ship at all costs. You've got a line of sight on them when they come out, and they don't seem to have pegged you as a significant threat yet, so I want you to take them out hard. Then we're going to make a run on the cargo shuttle they're using. Nobody mentioned anything about pirates being in the shuttle, but it wouldn't be on the ship sensors anyway. There have to be a few there, and we're going to stop them from getting away." The woman frowned through her faceplate. "If the freighter is carrying cargo like this, the crew isn't innocent either. Smugglers?" He nodded. "Yes, I made a deal with Connors that we'd take care of the pirates before we arrested his crew. He apparently has a real problem with releasing these kinds of weapons to scum like that, and good behavior deserves to be rewarded. We're going to arrest him and his people for smuggling, but I'll put in a good word with the captain. That's all I promised him, but we're still not going to trust them behind our backs with weapons. Clear?" "Looks like you're learning, sir. And it looks like the pirates are about to make their move. You should stay behind me. Your vacuum suit isn't rated for combat." Jack used the comm unit to bring up the video of the corridor. Moments later, half a dozen pirates popped out, firing their weapons in both directions as the other three rushed the cart with the lasers into view. With bullets bouncing in both directions down the corridor, no one could stop the cart from getting across the corridor and out of sight. But Rossini and her people certainly tried. Though the smugglers were firing their pistols, it was the Marines and their automatic weapons that cut the pirates still in the corridor down. Within seconds, the firing had ceased. Connors had good control over his people. In pairs, the Marines advanced to the cross corridor, and two of them made sure the area was clear while the other two checked the pirates to see if any were still alive. Apparently not, because the Marines immediately turned to pursue the fleeing pirates and their weapons. Jack examined the icons on the main screen of the comm unit and saw one shaped like a ship's map. Making the assumption that that was a way to see where everyone was inside the ship, he tapped it and brought up the same schematic that the smuggler had shown him in engineering. He expected to see the smugglers and his Marines crowding around the remaining pirates as they rushed to get to the cargo shuttle, but that's not what he saw at all. Instead, it looked like the two remaining pirates and the Marines were the only ones moving toward the cargo shuttle. The smugglers were retreating toward the second cargo shuttle. In fact, other than a few stragglers, most of them had already reached their destination. They had to have started moving before the pirates had even come out of the cargo bay. It looked like he'd been played and the rats were fleeing the sinking ship. Not that it would do them any good in the long run. Communication signals were much faster than shuttles. Jack wouldn't be able to stop them, but he made the effort anyway, running down a side corridor that led him in that direction. Based on the movements on the map, he'd arrive around the same time as the last of the smugglers. A couple of bursts of automatic weapons fire led Jack to suspect that the Marines had stopped the pirates with a cart. That only left the ones holed up in the cargo shuttle. Bearing Rossini's warning in mind, Jack wasn't going to push things. The smugglers might manage to undock from Edgar's ghost, but they weren't getting away. His people would make sure of that when they got the warning out. He noticed one person holding back from the last group rushing toward the cargo shuttle. It seemed that person had taken a stand in the side corridor. Jack guessed it was Connor. Well, it would be rude to keep the man waiting. Jack moved to the man's location at a sedate pace. When he stepped into that particular corridor, he wasn't surprised to see Connor standing in front of him. The smuggler had his arms crossed and a seemingly genuine smile on his face. His pistol was conspicuously holstered, so Jack had been right. The man simply wanted to gloat. "I thought you were going to help with the pirates," Jack asked. "Pressing business elsewhere?" The man's smile widened. "As a matter of fact, yes. My boys and girls did their part, though. When your Marines get to the cargo shuttle, they'll find we've already cleaned it up for them and smashed the controls. The rest of the lasers are there, but you won't have any living pirates to deal with. As for the rest of the deal, I'm keeping my bargain. None of my people will attack yours. I'm sure you anticipated placing us all under arrest, but sometimes life deals us a little setback now and again." Jack considered the man and nodded. "You'll get away from this ship, but you can't outrun a comm signal. My ratings are already calling the planetary authorities in Darkwind. Why risk your people's lives trying to run for safety that isn't there?" "Far be it from me to lecture you, Navy, but you're making a couple of assumptions. The first one being that your people can get back into your cutter. You see, as a smuggler, it behooves me to have controls built into all of my docking ports that might not be standard on any other freighter. That's how our people got into the cargo shuttle when the pirates thought everything was safe. It's also how we've locked your cutter up tight. I'm sure you'll get through the hatch in due time, but that's not going to do you any good in the short run. My people also locked down all the transmitters on the small craft and in the ship itself. There'll be no signal to warn anyone what's going on." With communications aboard the ship jammed, there wasn't anything Jack could do to check any of those claims, so he pressed on. "Then why the charade? You could have just pulled back rather than contacting me in engineering and left me to deal with the pirates all on my own. You didn't have to risk me seeing the locust scraps at all." Connor leaned against the bulkhead and nodded. "I could have, but that left too much of an opportunity for the pirates to overpower you and get away with those weapons. You can think whatever you like about me and my profession, and likely be right in the end, but I wasn't joking about having red lines I wouldn't cross. Getting you and your people involved served a couple of purposes. First, it made you aware the pirates had something you couldn't let them keep. Second, it distracted you from causing me and mine issues while we emptied the remaining cargo holds, particularly Cargo Hold 1, of a few other valuable cargoes. That's what we've been doing while all of this drama was taking place." Jack remembered the clusters of dots going to the cargo shuttle. It hadn't been wounded, it had been loot. He felt his expression harden. "More weapons?" Connor laughed. "Hardly. You're more than welcome to those. Still, since I was going to lose my ship no matter what happened, I needed a nest egg to tide me over until I could get another one. My crew almost cleaned out the remaining locust scraps as part of that, and it was only bad luck you saw enough to make you suspicious before we exited stage left. And you needn't worry about me hijacking someone else's ship, at least not anybody you'd care about. You see those pirates your ship is capturing right now? They have a couple of other ships operating in this sector." The smuggler grinned again. "I happen to know a fair bit about their operational patterns, more than they'd suspect at any rate, and I'm wagering I'm cleverer than they are. Watch and see what happens, Navy. I'll get me a new ship, and it won't cost me a single Confederation dollar." Jack took 2 steps forward and stopped. "I know your people have already evacuated, but on behalf of the Confederation Navy, I'm placing you under arrest for smuggling and other crimes yet to be determined. Don't resist. You've been polite thus far, other than putting a gun to my head, and I'd rather not have to shoot you." The man didn't seem the least bit disturbed by Jack's declaration. "I do regret the indignity of holding you at gunpoint, Navy. It's not the kind of behavior one would expect of a good host. You have my sincere apology for the necessity. That said, you know what lets me sleep soundly at night? Having a ship that's entirely under my control. That includes the emergency hatches that keep us safe from hull breaches. If you reach for that pistol, the one right in front of me is going to slam shut before you can even get it out of the holster. Test me if you want, but you'll miss my tearful goodbye if you do." Jack couldn't stop his lips from twitching. Damn, but the man could be charming. "I might be willing to test that assertion, so if you've got any parting words, now is the time to say them." The man grinned widely. "I like you, Navy. I really do. You're not a pompous jackass like so many other Confederation officers, and you have a sense of humor, though you're not going to let it get in the way of doing your duty. I can respect that. I'll leave you with this thought. I don't know where those locust weapons came from, but I'm going to find out. There's some kind of secret afoot, and I don't like the smell of it. You being the smart man you are, you'll pass word to your commanding officer, but I wanted you to know there's another pair of eyes looking into the matter from my side of the fence. I won't let rules keep me from finding out either." Connor straightened. "Now, if you're going to make any dramatic gestures, I believe this is the appropriate time. Best of luck to you, Navy. Maybe we'll meet again one day." Already certain the man hadn't lied to him, Jack went for his pistol and was utterly unsurprised when an emergency hatch slammed shut right in front of the smuggler. Jack raised the man's communications unit to try and open it back up and found the damn thing blank. It was turned off, and nothing he did would reactivate it. It looked like Connor had won this round, but maybe he wouldn't get away. Of course, Jack wasn't stupid enough to bet money on that, but it was always possible. In the meantime, all he could do was secure this ship and force his way back into their cutter to report what happened. He'd have to settle for dealing with the pirates and capturing the Locust weapons. In the greater scheme of things, he could live with that. For good or ill, his part in this little drama was over. Still, if he and Connor ever met again, as unlikely as that was, things would end very differently. Jack stood at attention in front of Commander Marziali's desk and watched the man pinch the bridge of his nose between his finger and thumb. He could tell the XO wasn't happy with his report, even though he tried to spin it as best he could. The end result had been as bad as Jack had feared. Even though he and his people had cleared the freighter of all remaining pirates and captured the Locust lasers, the smugglers had escaped. Worse, Connor had managed to sweet-talk his way past any trouble in orbit, taking his cargo shuttle down to the surface and vanishing without a trace. Darkwind had caught up with the pirate ship as expected, and even though the pirates had resisted, the Marines had taken the ship after the cruiser had disabled it. Jack had half expected to hear the pirate had been armed with Locust lasers, but they'd only had low-grade versions produced somewhere in the Confederation. He supposed that beat the alternative. It had taken Jack and his people an hour to break the hatch leading to their cutter open. Even the personnel airlocks on the freighter had been jammed up tight and all computers wiped. They'd gotten aboard the freighter easily enough when they arrived, but it was obvious that had been because Connor had wanted them to. It was humiliating, but the smuggler had played Jack before they even met. The executive officer shook his head, put his hands flat on his desk, and leaned back. "Do you know why the Navy sends officers to training ships like Darkwind, Jack? To give them seasoning and experience. We push you to do things you've never done before and to perform at a higher level than you think you can. We sent you to secure a freighter under the mistaken assumption the crew would be friendly. You went in with admirable suspicion, but the smugglers still managed to fool you and get away." "We seized the lasers and took care of all the pirates left aboard, sir," Jack countered. "With only 8 people and only 4 Marines, there was only so much we could do against such a large number of potential hostiles. Still, if any mistakes were made, I made them, not my people." "That's both admirable and true," Marziali said with a sigh. "Once the situation changed, you played the hand fate had dealt you as well as you could, I suppose. But not to put too fine a point on it, you were gullible. Sometimes you can't trust what your eyes tell you in a situation with so many variables at play. You need to develop a bit more skepticism when dealing with people like Connor." Jack risked a shrug. "What should I have done differently, sir? The moment I realized something was wrong, I took steps to address the situation. It turned out to be too little too late, but we were behind the 8 ball from the minute we docked. The smugglers were already moving things to their cargo shuttle by that time, while some of them kept the pirates pinned down. Hell, they'd already slipped into the remaining cargo shuttle and dealt with the pirates there. They had the situation aboard Edgar's Ghost under control the entire time." Marziali sighed again and nodded. "I suppose that's true, and that'll be the line we put forward in the report. They obviously held off dealing with the remaining pirates once they knew you were on the way. They had run the clock out and used you as the distraction they needed to slip away. This Connor is a lot smarter than most criminals I've dealt with. You were lucky he seemed to have some sense of honor, but you can't count on getting that lucky again." "What about the Locust lasers?" Jack asked, trying hard to hide his relief at avoiding the ass-chewing he'd expected. "It's kind of worrisome that something like those turned up out of the blue. I thought all of the wreckage had been dealt with, but we recovered 4 dozen ship-grade lasers on the freighter and the cargo shuttle that had to have come from mostly intact Locust drones. That's more firepower than Darkwind can generate, sir, and that worries the hell out of me." "Me too," Marziali admitted. "We'll include that in the report, but it's going to fall on somebody further up the chain of command to investigate the situation. Honestly, the way the Confederation Council had been cutting funds to the Navy over the last 100 years, I'm not sure I'd hold my breath if I were you. The Admiralty will need something a bit bigger slapped in their faces before they start paying attention to this kind of problem. In any case, our part in this is over, and I'm going to send a positive report to Captain Kadam about your actions. I think this mission will get you back into his good graces and probably clear the way for your promotion to Lieutenant Commander. Go clean up and get some sleep. You've earned it." Jack saluted and left the XO's office. Rather than heading back to his quarters, he turned toward the mess hall. He needed to get something to eat while he thought. It had been 2 centuries since the Locusts had invaded the Confederation, and while the Admiralty paid lip service to being prepared for a follow-up incursion, they still didn't know where the alien machines had come from, and they hadn't managed to duplicate their hyperdrives. Whether the Confederation faced trouble from pirates, smugglers, or a renewed alien invasion, there was a storm brewing on the horizon. He only hoped they'd be ready when it blew in. This has been Allies of Convenience, written by J.N. Chaney and Terry Mixon, performed by Jeffrey Kafer, a member of SAG-AFTRA. Copyright 2022 by J.N. Chaney. Production copyright 2022 by Variant Publications. Head over to variantscifiaudio.com/pages/hunt to learn more about the last Hunter series and receive special bonuses and new stories.